Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. It is 2021. I can't believe we finally made it. We had a 3-week hiatus from the UFC schedule. I went and fucked around and did whatever the hell I wanted, and now we're back at it. Yeah, I mean, I managed to release a couple breakdowns over this break, but here's the freaking podcast. It is literally the Sunday before I'm dropping this podcast. Still a late night, still a night owl, but I'm enjoying it. I hope you guys are enjoying the new setup. There are still a couple decorative things I'm waiting for to come in the mail. Damn Canada Post slacking on my shit, but I completely redid the entire studio. Obviously you guys can see it. You guys just have the footage of me and the new backdrop that I got, but painted the new studio, switched around the artwork. Once everything comes in, I still got a couple more decorative things coming in. Like I said, once it comes in, I'm actually going to do like a crib style video of the entire studio and drop it for my Patreon members just to give them a little bit more incentive. But I'm looking forward to like showing it off. I still got a couple wires and stuff that I got to hide, clean it up a little bit. But and yeah, one more decorative thing that I got to go on the wall behind me. But I'm really happy with how it came out. I love the color scheme. I love how everything came out. I've been ecstatic in terms of wanting to get this out for you guys and show it off to you guys and show that like in 2021, I'm just trying to take it to the next level, take it up even more. You know what I mean? I feel like I was one of those guys that really took the MMA handicapping podcasting game to another level. Like most guys were just going out there and releasing audio and not really putting too much work into it, where I felt like I'm the one that really took it to the next level and really caused other people to just step their game up as well too. And it's great for the community. Like we're getting better products, we're getting better podcasts and better things for to help you, the viewer. Like, you know, maybe not just physically like with how things look, but just have a more professional look, have more professional breakdowns and all that type of stuff. And I feel like I'm definitely bringing that to the community. So yeah, shout out to everybody that supported your boy. Shout out to everybody that, you know, gave me some solid comments and stuff on the Max Holloway and Calvin Kattar breakdown that I already dropped. I couldn't hold on to it. Like I needed to show it to you guys as soon as possible. So I dropped that last week. That footage was a little bit out of focus. I was still working on it. We're a one-man show over here, so I'm doing my best in terms of you know, fixing the lighting, fixing the focus. And now I feel like I've definitely gotten everything worked out, and I'm happy with it. I'm super happy. Shout out to everybody that's been supporting your boy since day one. 2021 is definitely the year that I'm going to be able to take this thing to the next level for sure. I know I'm going to be able to start doing this full time in the next couple months too. So shout out to everybody that's been helping your boy with that. Specifically the Patreon members. You guys are awesome. You guys are making this so easy for me to get my work done and give you guys the best quality and best perspectives for these matchups. So it's fucking awesome. All right, let's get the show going. First and foremost, let's do a quick betting recap of UFC Vegas 17, which was the December 19th event headlined by Wonderboy Thompson and Jeff Neal. That was another winning event for you boys. So we had, first and foremost, we had the lock of the night play, which was Jose Aldo at 5 units at minus 149. Again, I told people all week, I was very surprised I was getting Jose Aldo better than minus 200. And luckily we got him at minus 149, and he went out there and did the damn thing. A lot of people didn't think he would win the third round against Marlon Vera, me being one of them too, and I'm kind of happy that he decided to go the backpack route and absolutely just control Marlon Vera for the entirety of that third round and win that fight. So that was plus 3.36 units there. Next up, we had 2 units on Wonderboy Thompson at plus 100. That bet was a no-brainer for me, and I knew, you know, I knew for sure that fight was going to play out exactly like that. And I knew a minute into that fight, everybody else who, you know, was watching that fight and was thinking about betting one way or another, as soon as that fight started, within a minute or, you know, a minute and a half, everybody's like, of course this fight is going to play out this way, and that's exactly what happened for the majority of that 5 rounds. I was hoping that we would get a Wonderboy Thompson finish later in the fight. Unfortunately, I think he blew his knee or something, some sort of a knee injury, kind of deterred him from really getting it going more in that fight. But went out there, had a solid performance, and got the victory for us, so that's another plus 2 units there. Also had 1.5 units on Marcin Tybura at plus 101. again, another no-brainer of a bet for me there too. It took me until like fight day or the day before the fight to actually make that bet. But once I really talked myself through it and got into it, I'm like, of course he's going to win this. The only liability is Greg Hardy round 1 KO. There's no way Greg Hardy's going to go out there and beat this guy over 15 minutes. No way. Charles Tybura, better gas tank, better overall fighter, better grappling, better wrestling, and we definitely saw that. I was hoping that we are going to get the Tybura third round finish, as I did have a prop play on that. That doesn't end up coming to fruition, but still, we get the plus 1.52 units on betting Tybura straight at those dog odds. And then lastly, my other dog of the night play, I had under 2.5 units on Jillian Robertson and Tyler Santos. However, Santos goes out there and just wins a clean decision. That's minus 1 unit there. So all in all, plus 5.87 units with a 62% return on investment. I thought that was a great night. 3-1 on the night, solid profit, and a great way to end off the year too. Talking about ending off the year, I had a very rough run from middle of 2019 all the way to like the first quarter of 2020. And then in July, finally, I started to turn things around, end the year off on a plus 36 or 37 unit streak. Great way to end off things. I really felt like I fell into my groove finally once you started getting the second half of the calendar year under my belt. And it showed. Everybody knows that I'm able to make these calls and have solid calls like the Jake Collier call against Gian Vellante, the Derek Brunson call against Edmund Shabazian, the Gavin Tucker call against Billy Q, as the second last event of the year. I know I'm capable of these things. That's why people trust me. That's why I have over 220 patrons, throwing your boy $5 a month just to help support your boy and get some more insight into the type of game that I play and the strategy that I have going into these UFC events. So, I'm happy with how I ended off the year, plus 12.24 units in total in terms of ending off the year as a whole. But from July to the end of the year, I was on a plus 36 or plus 37 unit run. So I'm happy with that as well, too. We're steaming into 2021 now. We got 3 straight events coming up. And I see a ton of opportunities. I'm not going to say that there's value screaming at me or anything like that, but I do see that there's some solid spots for sure. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this card and breaking it down for you guys. Before I get into it, I'm going to drop the Patreon plug as always. If you guys want to help your boy out, $5 a month gives you a ton of perks. Something new that I'm adding for this year as well too is the pay-per-view parlay for the patrons. So I'm going to be putting 5% of my monthly take from Patreon. I'll be putting it on a 4-leg parlay decided by the patrons for every single pay-per-view. So if that parlay cashes, I'll be sending the winnings directly to a random Patreon member, and they get to keep the winnings. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's a great incentive, kind of just give back to everybody that's been supporting your boy. I think it's a fun way to do that. So not only is there that, there's the early access to the breakdown. So as you'll see, most of these breakdowns will be recorded earlier, and they'll already be posted on the Patreon. So those people already had access to it. A ton of other things. We have a great Discord channel, we have all access to all of my official picks. I drop my picks to the public the Friday before the fights, whereas on the Patreon, as soon as I make the bet, I post it. And the perfect example, I already made my lock of the night play for this January 16th card, and they have access to it, but the line is definitely not the same as to when I dropped it. So there's still time to get on it. Can't promise the same line. That's all I'm saying. So the Patreon members definitely have it the best. I have the rest of the perks in the description below, so make sure you guys go check that shit out. All right, I'm done. Let's get into the breakdowns. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Hope you guys had a great holiday, and I can't wait to get this 2021 schedule underway, and it starts with this event here. So check out the breakdowns, and let's get it going. I'm excited. Let's go. Hope you guys enjoy it. Austin Lingo versus Jacob Kilburn. We got minus 220 on the Fortis MMA product. Austin Lingo and plus 180 on Jacob Kilburn. Let's start off with Austin Lingo, who last was in the octagon against Yusuf Zalal, and it's been a crazy run that Zalal's been on since then. I think he's had 4 or 5 fights since this Austin Lingo fight, but Lingo taking a bunch of time off, and now we're seeing him roughly a year, just under a year later since his UFC debut. Now, he was 7-0 coming into the UFC, and he was the favorite, or roughly around the same type of favorite he was in this fight. He was the same over Yusuf Zalal, and the fight just did not go the way that I expected it to. I believe that one of my plays that night was the under 2.5 in that fight. However, we saw a very grappling heavy approach from Yusuf Zalal, taking down Lingo almost time after time again and doing some good work from on top. And then even when the fight was on the feet, he did a really good job with his kicks, keeping Lingo on the outside. As we know, that Lingo more often than not likes to get his punches going rather than working in that kicking range. So that's why I really think that Austin Lingo dropped the ball. Most of his fights have been a victory via KO pretty early in his fights. He goes out there, he has dynamite in his hands. He's able to pretty much just clip anybody he wants and pretty much put them down. And I think given the stylistic matchup here against Jacob Kilburn, it almost plays right into his hand. I think we're going to see a bit of a firefight here, which is why one of the totals actually piqued my interest, actually then picking a side here. Like now the under 2.5 is at plus 115, and I think at plus money, given the status of both guys and how they fight and the types of fighters that they are, I feel like they're both going to engage in the striking range, and one of them is going to land a bomb that could potentially put the other out. Now, in terms of how many times they've actually gone to a decision, so we got Jacob Kilburn, who's seen the scorecards twice in his career, whereas Austin Lingo has only seen it. I just want to confirm this number before I talk out of my ass. So the Yusuf Zalal fight, Phil Gonzalez, and Charles Williams. So 3 out of his 8 fights have gone to a decision. Jacob Kilburn, on the other hand, just confirming those numbers again, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 9 fights. But given the style, like I said, given the styles of these guys, they're primarily strikers. They like to go out there. They like to throw those bungalows. Lingo, on the other hand, I feel like he's more of a combination fighter. A very great camp as well too. Like I said, with Fortis MMA, these guys know how to train their guys. Saif Sayoud is an absolute magician when it comes to working with these guys and kind of just developing solid game plans. I like what we're seeing from Lingo. Great combinations, great hands, solid footwork as well too. And then Jacob Kilburn, on the other hand, more of a one and done puncher. Like he doesn't really throw many combinations, but he throws a variety of strikes, whether it's a kick, whether it's a teep, elbows, spinning kicks, whatever the hell it is. But he doesn't seem to really throw it in too many combinations. Now we've seen Jacob Kilburn have a couple opportunities to try to have success. And I was actually looking at his amateur career when I was talking about his decisions. But in terms of Jacob Kilburn's pro career, he's gone to a decision two times out of 11 fights. So again, I like the under 2.5. But like I said, Jacob Kilburn likes to throw a lot of spinning stuff. We've seen him on the Contender Series lose via dart choke to Bobby Moffett, and then obviously we saw him in the UFC lose via triangle choke to Billy Q. It seems like his kryptonite is guys that want to grapple, and I don't think that we're going to see that from Austin Lingo here. I think we're going to see both of these guys kind of try to show off their balls and swing for the fences. Obviously not like stupidly like a Don Fry type of scrap. I can't remember the guy that he fought, but you guys know what fucking fight I'm talking about. I'm not expecting them to just hold each other by the head and try to see who gets knocked out first, but I do think that we'll see these guys throw bombs. I doubt we'll see either of them kind of engage in that grappling instance. More often than not, their fights are in the stand-up realm unless their opponents really want to drag it to the ground, like the Billy Q's and the Bobby Moffetts against Jacob Kilburn. And then Austin Lingo, the Yusuf Zalal fight, is the perfect example of that as well too. So I like Austin Lingo to win this fight. I'm not sure if I'd be 100% down to bet him at minus 220 though. I need to see more from him. Just going out there and knocking dudes out pretty quickly is just not not the way to really sell me. You know what I mean? Even the Phil Gonzalez fight where he won via decision, I just don't have access to that tape or that footage, so I'm not really sure how he went about actually securing that victory, whether it was through grappling, whether it was through striking, whatever it was. But, he's going out there and knocking dudes out. And I think he'd absolutely do the same thing against Jacob Kilburn here. But I would rather bet the under 2.5 just in case Kilburn lands some sort of bomb. But I do like Lingo to win this fight via KO. So I think we'll see these boys kind of just throw bungalows, throw more combinations from Lingo, maybe a better game plan from Lingo as well too. Whereas Jacob Kilburn, we'll see him kind of just try to chip away and then wait to land that big bomb. So once again, I'll go with Austin Lingo to win this fight via KO, probably first or second round. But I think the spot here would be the under 2.5 at plus 115. Sarah Moras versus Vanessa Melo. We got minus 240 on the Canadian Sarah Moras and plus 200 on the Brazilian Vanessa Melo. Let's start off with Sarah Cheesecake Moras, who's coming off a loss to Sijara Eubanks. She's actually 1-4 in her last 5 fights. The only victory coming to Liana Jojua in that amount of time. I believe that was back at UFC 242, where she was able to finish Liana Jojua late. Just a grappling onslaught, and then a lot of perseverance and durability. Now, she isn't the most comfortable on her feet, and she has some solid jiu-jitsu to back her game up, but in terms of level of experience, it blows Vanessa Melo out of the water. Sarah Moras was on The Ultimate Fighter. She's fought a lot of tough competition, including Macy Chiasson and Lucy Pudilova, but she's been around the game for a while now, and for her to be this big of a favorite, I think it's more so just the experience level, not to mention also Vanessa Melo's not the greatest either too. This is almost a case of who's worse, and I feel like Sarah Moras is just a little bit ahead of Vanessa Melo in terms of talent, skill, and obviously experience. We're talking about a 6-6 opponent going up against a 10-8 opponent. That's the type of fight that we're getting on our hands here. It's more than likely that whoever loses here is probably going to get cut from the UFC, even though this is going to be the second loss in a row for Sarah Moras. She's just had so many opportunities in the UFC that I just don't see the UFC giving her another chance if she does end up losing here. Vanessa Melo, on the other hand, she's already had 3 losses in a row. She hasn't even gotten her hand raised in the UFC. So the fact that she's even still around after 3 losses in a row in the UFC is a little bit mystifying to me. So I'm absolutely certain if she loses this fight, she's more than likely going to get cut as well too. But in terms of skills and talents, as we're talking about, again, Sarah Moras has that moving forward type of style, doesn't mind, eating some shots to try to get hers going. But I think where she'll have the advantage is if this fight does hit the ground, and I do think that's where it's going to end up going. Now, even though Tracy Cortez was 2 of 9 on takedowns against Vanessa Melo, I still believe that a little bit of the size had an issue in that fight. Tracy Cortez normally fights at the weight class below. However, she did take that fight against Vanessa Melo just to get a fight in to begin with for that year, because she had just gotten signed off the Contender Series that year, and then she wanted a quick turnaround, and the only opponent that she could get was Vanessa Melo at a weight class above, so she did end up taking that. I think that's Sarah Moras. In terms of size, we got 5'7" from Sarah Moras, 5'5" from Vanessa Melo, 67-inch reach from Sarah Moras, 65-inch reach from Melo. So I think we could see a little bit of outpowering from Moras in terms of being able to just muscle her to the ground, push her up against the cage, and just wear on her. And I think that's where Melo's eventually going to break. Now, I like, the last opponent that Vanessa Melo fought was Carol Rosa, who shows great boxing, great combinations, and great footwork, and she just battered up Vanessa Melo for the entirety of those 15 minutes. I'm not saying that we're going to see the same type of performance from Sarah Moras here, but I feel like the linear motion of Vanessa Melo with her striking, very just plodding forward, doesn't really cut angles, just throws power in her shots, and throws combinations, which is decent, but doesn't show much else other than that. So unless we see a completely revamped game plan from Vanessa Melo, I don't really see her winning this fight. with that said, at minus 240, I am not touching Sarah Moras at all. Like, you need to give me pick-em odds for me to even pick a side here in terms of actually betting it. Obviously, the Sarah Moras side is the side that I'm leaning on, and that's where I think she ends up winning. So I think that she just wears on Melo, lands some good shots on the feet, drags the fight to the ground, or even in the clinch, just kind of overpowers her. She's got a little bit of a caboose on her too, probably one of the bigger cabooses that we've seen in the UFC. But she uses it well. She has a good base. She's kind of strong too, but talent level is just not where you want to be. Especially when you're in the UFC, these are probably more of the bottom of the barrel in the division. So I'll go with Sarah Moras. I think she wins this fight. Again, pushes up Vanessa Melo against the cage, accrues some control time, lands some good shots on the feet. But ultimately, I think it's just Vanessa Melo not being to that level. How she even got to the UFC is beyond me, but neither of them really are at that level where you're like, okay, they're a top 15 type of woman. I'm not that, or fighter, I should say. I'm not going to say that, but I will go with Sarah Moras to win this fight via decision. Ramazan Emeev versus David Zawada. We got minus 260 on the Russian and plus 220 on David Zawada. So let's start off with Ramazan Emeev, who going into taping this fight, I initially thought that I was going to be making a lock of the night play, 5 units, minus 250 on Emeev, but I'm sort of backtracking from that now. So don't get me wrong, I still think that he goes out there and has a solid performance. I've always looked at him as a guy that has a very efficient MMA style, from his striking to his clinch game to being able to take opponents down. The guy does a really good job of mixing all those facets of MMA together and coming out on the winning end more often than not. He has a great record of 19-4. He's been around the game since 2009 and has definitely accumulated a lot of experience in that amount of time. His only loss in the UFC up to this point is against Anthony Rocco Martin, but he's only been in the UFC for about 5 fights. He hasn't been the most active guy, which is a little bit of a detriment to him in my opinion, but he's slowly starting to get in there and trying to make a name for himself. Obviously, the setback to Anthony Rocco Martin has kind of extinguished the heat that was behind him going into that fight. However, this fight against David Zawada should definitely help him bring that heat back. Now, my only concern here with Zawada is, well, not only, I have a couple concerns here with, Ramazan Emeev, is one, his volume and output seems to be lacking a little bit. He's usually striking in about the 30 strikes per fight range, or per 15 minutes, that we should say. But he's very calm, cool, and collected type of striker, where he's just waiting for his openings and then he lunges forward and lands a couple good shots. He mainly throws in 2 punch combinations, the 1-2 down the middle, but his 2 is very, very sneaky. Even when he throws it as a naked punch, it lands more often than not. Now, it's saying on UFC stats that he strikes at a 43% clip. However, it seems like he's a little bit more effective given how often he's landing that right hand especially. The way that he mixes in his clinch game as well with his striking is very impressive, as well as mixing in the takedowns to follow up those clinch positions is very impressive as well too. The issue that I have with his takedowns now is that sometimes he I'm not saying they're desperation shots per se, but I feel like they're more so shots that are that leave him open and kind of prone to submissions at times. We see perfect examples of that in his Anthony Rocco Martin fight, where Martin's in on a couple Kimura attempts. More often than not, people use Kimuras to defend takedowns, but Martin was quite close to completing one of those Kimura attempts. Now, even in the Nicholas Stolze fight, we see Emeev, landed 5 takedowns in that fight, but more often than not in those takedown attempts, he's ending up in a guillotine of Stolze. And Stolze obviously doesn't complete any of those submissions, but when you're going up against a high-level jiu-jitsu player like David Zawada, you have to be a little bit more mindful of where your neck is when you're trying to complete these takedowns. Now, let's go over to the Zawada side of things, where Zawada, he's a veteran. He has 22 fights in total now. This is going to be his 23rd fight. Just 1 fight less than Emeev, but he's been around the globe. He's He had a solid campaign with KSW before coming to the UFC. He dropped his first 2 fights in the UFC, but that first one to Danny Roberts, very, very close fight. The second one to Li Jingliang gets finished with just a couple of seconds left on the clock, in my opinion, or at least from what I remember. And then the Abubakar Nurmagomedov fight, Nurmagomedov does not do a good job of securing that top position, allows Zawada to clear that shoulder and complete that that triangle choke, and he ends up with the submission victory. Now Zawada, very crafty on the ground, high level jiu-jitsu player, and with the inefficiencies that I said with Emeev in terms of his takedowns, I feel like this is a very sketchy spot for Emeev, especially if he wants to go the grappling route. Now, when he does establish that top position, I'm talking about Emeev here, he is very effective from on top. He has very solid ground and pound. He's able to really, with that lanky frame that he has, like his torso is very, very long, and the amount of momentum he's able to generate when he's going for his ground and pound situations, he generates a lot of power, and he's able to like put a hurting on some of these guys. Now, he's not really able to find finishes more often than not. The guy's a bit of a decision machine, and that's a little bit of an attribution to his safe style of fighting. He doesn't really overextend himself to really get put out or to get submitted or anything like that, but he does put himself close to those situations. Again, the takedowns against Stolce was very iffy for me in terms of kind of seeing how he racks up against a guy like Zawada. Zawada, has potential still. He's only 30 years old. I feel like he still has some improvements that he can make in his game, and obviously that victory over Nurmagomedov puts a ton of confidence back into him, especially in a fight where it was probably a chopping block fight, where he probably would have got his pink slip if he didn't get the victory against Nurmagomedov, and that was a tough task too. Going into Russia, fighting Nurmagomedov and fighting Abubakar in his UFC debut was almost a sign that the UFC is like, you know what, let's throw in Zawada there, let's see how he does, but we do want to see Abubakar get the victory, to carry on that Nurmagomedov lineage per se. Unfortunately for the UFC, Zawada goes out there, gets the victory, cashes as a plus 225 underdog, and maybe not spoils the plans of the UFC, but I'm sure that they were in the Nurmagomedov business and not the David Zawada business. But if Zawada is able to go out there and spring another upset against a solid Russian prospect like Emeev, maybe the UFC starts looking at Zawada a little bit harder. But I think this is a good fight for Emeev in terms of being able to go out there and have a solid game plan in terms of striking, waiting for his opportunities, and landing the better shots on Zawada, as I believe that a more technical striker like Anthony Rocco Martin would be able to solve the puzzle that is Emeev. I don't think Zawada has that type of striking skill and the awareness in terms of dealing with a guy that's as efficient as Emeev, but he does have a bit of power in his hand, so if he lands on Emeev, he could definitely hurt him, something that Nicholas Tosa was able to do in that first round, at the end of that first round against Emeev. And also, if this fight does end up on the ground, Zawada does have a good ground game as well too, to potentially make things a little bit more competitive. However, I'm still siding with Emeev, maybe not as a lock of the night play anymore, but as a possible parlay piece on one of my plays for this card. I wanted to go with initially a 5-unit minus 250 lock of the night play here on Emeev, but I can't do that anymore after running the tape. I'm more comfortable with him as maybe like a 1 or 1.5 unit parlay piece with something else on this card, because let's be honest, this card is a little bit chalky in some of these spots, especially in the spots that I feel like guys have a better edge on, but still not to the level of playing them at minus 220, minus 250 as a straight play and wagering, the 4 or 5 units on the lock of the night play. So I do like Emeev here still. I think he gets the better of the striking exchanges, lands the better shots. Zawada does seem to have a little bit of trouble when it comes to his cardio as well too. It seems to slow down a little bit later in his fights, and I think that's where Emeev could definitely take advantage later in fights as well too, whether it's getting the takedowns or just getting the better of the striking exchanges. Emeev has never really shown any issues with his cardio, and it seems definitely in check, and you would expect it to be in check, especially for a guy that is as low output as he is. So given the cons on the Emeev side, which are his low output, sometimes putting himself into submission-prone opportunities for his opponents, and then obviously not fighting the level of competition that would really set him apart too. That's the last thing I wanted to touch on in this breakdown. So he's fought Sam Alvey, middle of the pack kind of guy, Alberto Mina, who I don't even know if he's in the UFC anymore, Stefan Sekulic, who was making his UFC debut, I believe, on short notice in that fight. Anthony Rocco Martin obviously loses that fight, but Rocco Martin, I'd say above average, but not a top 10 to top 15 type of guy, so that type of loss is not the greatest on your record. And then Nicholas Tosa, who as well, another UFC debutant. So we've been seeing him going out there and beating the guys that he's supposed to beat as a heavy favorite, like against Sekulic, minus 680, against Stolze, minus 420. He's going out there and doing what he's supposed to do. Now, is he going to be able to do that against a vet like David Zawada as a minus 250 favorite? I don't think he deserves to be a minus 250, but I still think he goes out there and gets his hand raised. So I'll go with Ramazan Emeev to win this fight with a bit of a striking clinic here, landing the better shots on Zawada, and then taking over even later in this fight with his very efficient style. So once again, I'll go with Ramazan Emeev to win this fight via decision. Justin Tafa versus Carlos Felipe. We got plus 170 on Justin Tafa and minus 200 on boy Carlos Felipe. Let's start off with Carlos Felipe, who's coming off a victory over Yorgan De Castro in a fight that he was coming in as a plus 190 underdog. That was a fight that a lot of people, maybe they thought that Yorgan didn't really show his best against Greg Hardy and thought he would be able to come back against Felipe here and actually showcase what he was made of, and actually showcase what he showed in his fight against Justin Tafa, and showing off that explosive power. However, Carlos Felipe had different plans for that fight, and he showed a great game plan. Great cardio, great pace, great pressure, never really let Justin Tafa off the hook, just always stayed in his face, landing beautiful shots straight down the middle, didn't really discriminate with the head or the body either, had some good leg kicks mixed in there as well too. And I thought he showed a glimpse of what his full potential could look like. Now my question is what his chin and where his durability is at, because I feel like that's the only way that he loses this fight. If Justin Tafa lands a beautiful punch right on the button, will Felipe go out? Will, from what I've seen, Felipe does a really good job of rolling what punches. He ate a lot of shots from Yorgan De Castro, who hits very, very hard. And we didn't see him really flinch, didn't get dropped, knocked down, or anything like that. The only real success, and I say success with some quotes here, or at least with an asterisk, is the third round of Yorgan De Castro, where he just pushed up Carlos Felipe up against the cage. Unfortunately for De Castro in that fight, he had a very impatient coach or referee in Kevin Satake, who just wanted to see action. So, 10 or 15 seconds into these clinch positions, you're seeing Satake kind of just push them apart. And then as soon as he resumes the fight, De Castro did the exact same thing, bull rushed Felipe pretty much up against the cage, not without hitting a bunch of shots though, and was just looking to kind of slow the fight down. Felipe's pace and pressure was definitely getting to him and kind of breaking him, hence why I feel like he went that route of just pushing Felipe up against the cage and kind of slowing down the fight. Felipe, however, did a really good job on the defensive side in terms of landing good shots while defending, not really giving up any takedowns or anything like that. Landing big shots, and all the judges actually scored that third round for Felipe, even though the majority of it was spent with his back against the cage. I'm glad that the judges and referees are seeing it that way, as it's usually the guy that's dishing out the damage that should be getting those scorecards rather than the guy who's just trying to take control. If you guys remember, the criteria with judging is damage should be first, then comes cage control. So I'm glad that the judges were on point. They were tested that night. It was almost like a trick question type of round for them, and luckily for them, they actually came out on the proper side, and we did see Felipe get the decision victory in that fight. The fight before that, against Sergey Spivak, we saw Spivak take a very all around approach in beating Felipe. Clinching him up against the cage, landing some good damage there, and then in that third round, getting him down and really establishing that top position, landing some good shots from on top, and winning that fight, at least in my book, 29-28, with Felipe taking the second round, I believe it was. So I'm seeing an improving game from Carlos Felipe, who will be 26 by the time that this fight happens, and I feel like he has a better overall game and full package compared to what we've seen from Justin Tafa. Now, Tafa, on the other hand, we're talking about a guy who's coming off a KO victory, beautiful KO victory over Juan Adams, and then before that, he was the one that got put up by Yorgan De Castro. The one thing that Tafa has gotten away with is his power. Like, he shows deficiencies in certain parts of his games or of his game, but I will give him some credit for actually going for takedowns. Not something we really see from a guy who's mainly known to be a heavy-handed puncher. He has some decent takedowns, some decent trips, but he does show some green and vulnerability on the ground. Even when he's on the ground, there are instances where he gets easily reversed, and guys are doing some good work from on top on him. His special weapon, if you want to have like wrestlers have signature moves, I'd say Justin Tafa's signature move is his uppercut. He's put out a couple guys with it. He generates a lot of power with it, but I find it hard to believe that he'll be able to land cleanly on Carlos Felipe, who shows very good head movement and good defensive striking. We've never really seen him in trouble when it comes to the striking realm. Or at least in terms of getting hurt and dropped. And I truly think that's Tafa's really only way to win this fight. I think Felipe will have him out-volumed pretty much in every single round that Carlos Felipe has fought up until this point. He's landed at least 20 strikes, except with the third round of his fight against Sergey Spivak, where we saw Spivak actually get him to the ground and really nullify the offense that was coming back his way. So I think Tafa is going to be outgunned here. He doesn't mind being pushed back, which kind of sucks, and it's not to your advantage when you're going up against a guy like Carlos, who likes to push the pace forward, likes to get in your face, throw the jab out there, really work the body as well too. And he just loves coming forward and landing shots. And Tafa is more of the guy that seems to be looking for that knockout punch. I'm not the most impressed with Tafa. I feel like he relies on his power too much, and it's worked out for him, other than the Yorgan De Castro fight where he just showed poor fight IQ in terms of just lunging forward. It looked like he was holding out his left arm to try to block anything that was coming from De Castro, but as soon as he put his hand down and went for his own punch, that's when De Castro decided to throw his counter and absolutely stiff Justin Tafa in that fight. So that was very unfortunate for Tafa to have to go through and suffer his first loss. Another thing about Tafa's record that I found very intriguing, of the 5 victories that he's gotten, one of them being his amateur fight, none of his opponents has fought again, other than one, I believe it was Dave Taumopo, absolutely butchering that name, but that's the fight before he made it to the UFC. He finished that guy in the second round, but that guy fought one more time and lost again. So he ended up with his record at 3-3. Very green is Justin Tafa still. Probably didn't have the most competition down under there to really test his skill and test his might before coming over to the UFC. And that might be to his detriment, because he's really having to, find his potential and find his true self within the UFC against some of these sharks. And I feel like Carlos Felipe, from a stylistic standpoint, is a very difficult matchup. You're talking about a guy who will definitely out-volume Justin Tafa here and probably have a better overall game. Now, my concern on the Felipe side is he might feel like he wants to stroke his ego a little bit, and he might go punch for Justin Tafa. However, I still feel like the head movement that we've seen from Felipe, he keeps it quite sharp, and he's pretty good with staying out of the way of these big shots and rolling with big shots as well too. You got to think that he's been trained to avoid that uppercut, as Justin Tafa has put out many people with that single strike. So hopefully he minds his P's and Q's in that aspect. Another thing that I'm kind of worried about with backing Felipe is his willingness to almost just be pushed up against the cage with not much urgency to get off of it. And I've seen Tafa actually be successful with kind of holding guys up against the cage. Not as successful as prior opponents, like as maybe Sergey Spivak was, but I think that Justin Tafa could win a couple minutes here and there if he's able to push up Felipe, and if we don't see much urgency from Felipe to get out of those situations. So that's where my concern lies with Felipe. However, if this does reach the judges' scorecards, I heavily favor Felipe here. We still still need to get a better gauge on what Justin Tafa's cardio looks like as well too. So I'm not really sure what we'll see from him later in the second round or later in the third round, as we've never really seen him in that part of a fight yet. The longest his fights have gone, I think, is midway through the second round. I just want to confirm this on my Tapology yet. It was his first ever fight that went 3.5 minutes into the second round, and that was a fight that was grapple heavy as well too. His opponent had success with reversing Tafa a couple times, but the ultimate or the final sequence that led to the finish of his opponent was probably one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. So the guy has full mount on Justin Tafa and kind of sits his butt on his chest, not in the way that a normal full mount would be, but he actually props his leg up and is kind of just sitting on him like he's squatting on top of him. That's not the position that you want to have, because it really allows the opponent to buck and shrimp and get out of those positions. And that's exactly what Justin Tafa did that night, because he reversed the position, got full mount himself, and then started raining down shots on his opponent, and that's how he got him out of there. So the later this fight goes, I feel like I gotta lean the Carlos Felipe side, but that's only because we've seen him go to a decision 2 times in a row now, and we've seen his cardio hold up. Whereas Justin Tafa, we just haven't seen that yet. But given the pace, pressure, and style of Felipe, I gotta assume that he's going to be the one that's fresher later in this fight. And I wouldn't be mad at anybody that takes a shot at the over 1.5 here too, because I feel like Felipe will be hella durable. He doesn't seem like the most keen on getting guys out of there. But then again, Justin Tafa's durability is definitely questionable, especially after getting knocked out as viciously as he did to Yorgan Castro back in October of 2019. I'm not saying that Felipe is as big of a puncher as Yorgan de Castro, but you got to consider what Tafa's durability is like. We've seen him rocked in earlier fights in his career too, so that's something to keep an eye on. However, I still like Felipe to win this fight. Minus 200 is not too bad of a line. I do like Felipe here. That power of Tafa does scare me, but from what I've seen from Felipe, it seems like he has a beard on him. It seems like he rolls with punches very well, and he never really shows any signs of getting stunned or rocked or anything like that as of yet. I feel like Tafa is the hardest puncher that he's fought up until this point. Yorgan de Castro is obviously a very hard puncher himself too, but I feel like we'll see Felipe actually endure whatever Tafa throws at him, and we'll see a much more complete game from from Felipe, as well as the pace, pressure, and volume too. The volume is the main thing here, as I feel like it's just going to keep Tafa super uncomfortable, kind of just telegraphing all of his shots and his punches, and that's where I think Felipe will be able to take advantage. So I'm going to take Felipe to win this fight, probably either late third round finish or decision. I'll go with decision just to be on the safe side, but I do like I do like Felipe to win this fight. Tom Breese versus Omari Akhmedov. We got minus 150 on Tom Breese and plus 130 on the Russian Omari Akhmedov. So let's start off with Akhmedov, who's coming off a loss to Chris Weidman last time around, where he lost that fight via decision. But before then, he was putting together a pretty solid streak where he won, 5 straight fights in a row, actually undefeated in his last 6. We have a draw there with Marvin Vettori way back at UFC 219 in 2017. But before that, the only time he had suffered a defeat, or not only, but one of the times he had suffered defeat was Alessio dos Santos back in 2016. Now, we know what Akhmedov's style is. He likes to move forward. He has a solid, some decent power in his hands. Throws a lot of winging hooks, a lot of wide winging hooks. Not really the most technical striker out there. Has some decent takedowns as well too, and does a decent job of holding top pressure when his opponents aren't really doing the best in terms of trying to get out of those bad positions. It's funny because he kind of reminds me of a guy like Yoel Romero, in the sense that a lot of people always want to shit on his cardio and his gas tank and saying, oh, he's always huffing and puffing in that third round and he's always live to get finished in that third round. However, he's still always winning these decisions. He's always going out there and surviving the third rounds, or even winning the third rounds in some of his fights. And so he's kind of like proving people wrong, even though people are assuming these certain things about him. Like, he did lose in the third round to Sergio Moraes and Alessio dos Santos back in 2015 and 2016 respectively. However, since then, he hasn't lost a fight via finish or even finished a fight in that amount of time either. Now, in terms of talking about finishing fights, the last time he did finish a fight was against Brian Ebersol, but but that was a little bit of a interesting one because that was a knee injury that they eventually stopped at the end of that first round. So if you want to talk about legitimate last finish for Akhmedov, God, I'm absolutely butchering his name, Omari Akhmedov, the last time we saw him actually finish a fight and not due to an injury was against Thiago Perpetuo way back at UFC Fight Night 32, which was in November of 2013. So we're talking over 7 years ago, or just over 7 years ago, with a couple months as well too, since we saw him get a finish. With that said, like again, he doesn't have the most impact or power when we're talking about his ground and pound and when he's holding top control over these guys. But he's still able to go out there and grind these guys out, push them up against the cage, and get the takedowns that he needs to, and just outposition these guys, which is why he was able to go on that 6-fight unbeaten streak before running into Chris Weidman, which was a very, very close fight itself too. A lot of both of those guys kind of relying on the position more than damage in those fights, and Chris Weidman was able to outposition him for the majority of that fight. Now, this is a completely different stylistic matchup that Omari has fought in a long time. Now, going up against a guy like Tom Breese, you're talking about as somebody who's very, very slick on the feet, amazing boxing, very crisp, very technical, a big dude too. That's something that a lot of people are going to have to worry about here if you are backing Omari Akhmedov. We got 6 foot for Omari with a 73-inch reach, whereas Tom Breese is coming in with a 6'3" advantage in terms of the height. Not advantage, sorry. He is 6'3" coming into this with a 73.5-inch reach, but they're definitely going to look a lot different in terms of different weight classes once they step into the cage as well too. Now, Tom Breese is a guy that I've been very high on for a long time, but it seems like his issue is that mental game. He's not always able to go out there and do the best that he can because it seems like he mentally collapses and he mentally breaks. There was a long lull in a period of time where he wasn't really even going out there and getting fights just because he just mentally couldn't do it. He's always had these anxiety attacks and these panic attacks, and I hope now that he's had 2 straight fights within the calendar year that hopefully he's been able to fix that and remedy that and is able to actually make the walk. Like, I believe one of his fights, I can't remember exactly which one, but it might have been the Roman Kopylov fight. It might have been even earlier than that, maybe against Ian Heinisch, Carlos Fajeda, or even Alessio Di Chirico. All of those fights he pulled out of, but one of those, it was literally like the day of that he eventually pulled out of the fight due to mental whatever it was. So if he's able to fix that, and if he's able to really get that kind of solved, I feel like he could be a really big problem for a lot of guys in the game. His loss to Brendan Allen was a very, very weird one. He initiated the grappling. He tried getting the fight to the ground with the beautiful trip. However, Brendan Allen did a really good job in terms of changing the momentum of the direction of that takedown, and eventually ended up on top of Tom Breese. You kind of see the failed look in Tom Breese's eyes as soon as he ends up on his back. Still had a hook in a weird position given how long and lengthy his body is. However, Brendan Allen was able to do a good job in terms of securing that top position. Now they eventually kept working on the ground and got put up against the cage, and Tom Breese was just stuck in this weird position where Brendan Allen was just kind of on top of him, almost stacking him and just raining down shots, raining down elbows. And Tom Breese was in a very compromised position that was very, very tough to get out of. Now, if he was more so in the open cage, maybe he would have been able to get out and buck and shrimp and explode out of that situation. However, being up against the cage, pinned up the way he was, it was very, very tough for him to defend against the big ground and pound that was coming from Brendan Allen. So that was an unfortunate loss. However, he comes back, I believe, it was 8 months afterwards, comes in against a new UFC opponent in KB Buller, where he was able to show off his beautiful, striking, his bread and butter, his hands, his kicks. And, it wasn't the longest fight. It only lasted 1 minute and 42 seconds after he landed a beautiful power jab down the middle that landed just beautifully on the button. Like, I know a lot of people are going to give my guy KB Buller some shit for dropping the weight that he did, but just go back and watch that jab. It was just perfectly executed. He got the brunt of that strike right on the center of the face, just right on the nose. If you get hit really hard on the nose, more often than not, guys are going to collapse and fall to the ground. And eventually, Tom Breese just went apeshit with the ground and pound and eventually got the stoppage there. So I'm sure mentally that was probably a very big thing for him to get that, and hopefully he's able to parlay that into a solid performance here against Omari Akhmedov, because on the feet, I think he absolutely blows Akhmedov Akhmedov out of the water. Now, I've heard certain takes out there that they think that, the under 2.5 is a solid spot. It did, it did intrigued me at first. However, just looking at the way that Omari deals with guys on the ground, it doesn't seem to me that it will be something that will break Tom Breese. And I think you're going to have to break Tom Breese to finish him. And I think that's what, given add in the incentive that he was pinned up against the cage against Brendan Allen, and the tenacity that Brendan Allen was bringing into that cage as well, too, with that ground and pound. I think it's going to be tough to finish a guy like Tom Breese, especially for a guy like Omari, who, again, not the biggest power puncher on the ground, not the biggest ground and pounder either. So I think that Tom Breese will be able to deal with that. The longer this fight stays on the feet, the worse it is for Omari Akhmedov, and the liver I think Tom Breese is in terms of finishing this fight. I think he could absolutely pick him apart on the feet. He's got to maintain his distance. He's got to make sure that he circles out, keeps his back off the cage. I believe, they are at Fight Island, so they're going to have the bigger cage. I'm not a huge proponent of the smaller cage being worse for certain guys. I do think it is a bit of a factor, but not like a huge one where it's just like, okay, just because they're in the small cage, we're definitely getting a finish. I'm not that type of guy, but I do think that this slightly bigger cage does favor Tom Breese in terms of being able to have a little bit more room to pivot off of the center line, and when his back is being pushed up against the cage, he has or closer to the cage and that warning track, he's able to pivot and get out of the way of those strikes, and that clinch situation of Omari, who needs to get his hands on Breese to get this victory. I think he needs to drag this fight to the ground, spend some time on top. And Tom Breese has been putting in work with his jiu-jitsu too. He's had a couple grappling competitions and grappling fights, although he didn't really show the greatest grappling against Brendan Allen. Allen is a high-level jiu-jitsu guy, in my opinion, as well, too. But I think we could see, even if this fight does end up on the ground, I think we could see some good stuff from Breese off of his back. So I'm not too worried about Breese there either. My only qualm and my only issue with Breese is his mental state. We can't trust it yet. At least in my eyes, I can't trust it yet. Skill for skill, he should absolutely blow Omari Akhmedov out of the water. Like, he should be a minus 250 favorite if he could mentally keep it together. Now, I need to see him go out there and show us fight after fight after fight, maybe 3 or 4 fights in a row where we see him not break, not mentally take a break or anything like that, or fold under any type of pressure. That's when I'll start to be a little bit more confident in Tom Breese. But if you're telling me skill for skill right now, I'm going to have to go with Tom. I don't see any value on Omari at that plus money. I feel like Tom Breese has this fight wrapped up. He needs to keep it on the feet. Even if it does get on the ground, I'm interested to see how he's able to use his frame and the jiu-jitsu that he's been able to accrue, the training that he's been able to accrue over the last little while, and how effective he can be with it. But his best work will definitely be done on the feet. One line that I was actually intrigued to look at was Tom Breese via KO, as I think that's a very live option if it does remain on the feet. Tom Breese via KO is plus 230. I think that's a solid spot. That's a good prop. You might hear me trip about that on the Propping You Up stream that I do with Cody later this week. But I like Tom Breese to win this fight. He just needs to string together a couple of victories, get that confidence at its peak, and then Then I'd be willing to part ways with my money and let him go out there and fight for my money. So I'll go with Tom Breese. Much better striking. The frame is going to be very, very tough for Omari to deal with as well, in my opinion. But the cardio, I think, kind of washes itself out. I still think that Breese will have the slight advantage in that third round. So maybe Breese third round is a possibility. But it's been a long time since we've seen Omari finished in the cage, close to 5 years now. So who knows? Maybe Breese is that guy. It absolutely is a possibility. So once again, I'll go with Tom Breese to win this fight via KO. But am I most confident in playing him at minus 150? Probably not. But I do like him to win this fight via KO, probably first or second round. Wu Yanan versus Joselyne Edwards. We got minus 165 on Wu Yanan and plus 145 on the UFC newcomer, Joselyne Edwards. Let's start off with Wu Yanan, who's coming off a decision loss to Mizuki Inoue in a very, very close fight which you could arguably give to her as well too. She had great output with her striking. She threw over 200 strikes, landed over 100 of them as well too, and she was doing some good work on the feet. Unfortunately for her, Mizuki Inoue really implemented her grappling, really closed the distance, worked good in the clinch, got a couple takedowns, and did some good work there. But it was a very close fight. You could absolutely score it for Wu Yanan as well. I tried even going back to the MMA decisions page and seeing if more fans saw it my way as well too. However, there were only about 30 or 32 scorecards, and the majority of them were in Mizuki Inoue's favor. So maybe I didn't, or I just did not want to read into that fight as much as I was thinking. But I think we're seeing a progression in the confidence of Wu Yanan compared to the first time we saw her in the UFC, where she just got completely outmuscled and manhandled, or woman-handled, I should say, by Gina Mazzani. And that was the best performance that we've seen from Gina in the UFC as well. So, that was a tough fight for Wu. She just could not get anything going. Mazzani did a really good job of pinning her up against the cage and just beating her up in that style, that dirty boxing, dirty clinch style. She had a lot of success there, and Wu just did not know what the hell she could do in that aspect. And then in the next fight, she goes out there and submits Lauren Mueller with a beautiful armbar. A weird one, too, because you didn't really see her torque on it much. It seemed like Lauren Mueller knew right away that it was in too deep. She was not going to be able to get out, and she kind of just tapped her. So, good on Wu for being able to pull off that type of submission. And then in the next fight against Inoue, obviously just couldn't really get her game going in terms of being dominant enough with her striking, but I am very impressed with the volume and the output that we saw too. Great combinations from Wu Yanan as well. I think that we're seeing a progression in her game, a progression in her confidence, which I think is going to pay dividends for her in the UFC. Now, Wu's still young. I believe she's 24 or 25 years old, and to get this type of experience this early in your career is very, very helpful. Now, also one more thing I want to point out about Wu is actually I find it very weird that we have Marlon Sandro in her corner. For the diehard MMA fans out there, you guys will know Marlon Sandro from his time in Bellator. Very high-level jiu-jitsu, high-level jiu-jitsu artist, as well as I believe he was a champion in Bellator as well too. And to see them kind of link up and work together is just weird. I don't know. Like, I don't mean it in like you shouldn't see those two types of people together, but not often do you see a Brazilian and a Chinese person kind of working together, especially in the mixed martial arts world. So, good job on Wu Yanan. She actually received her blue belt after she tapped out Lauren Mueller in their fight too. So they are having a solid working relationship where they're seeing the progression of Wu Yanan with her jiu-jitsu as well too. Now, going on to the Joselyne Edwards side, where she's coming in on short notice, she has she's stepping in for Betch Correa, who just recently pulled out due to having to take a surgery. I forgot exactly what she had to pull out for, but I'm liking what we're seeing from Joselyne. She's 25 years old. She's 9-2. Her most recent loss was to Sarah Alpar, who is in the UFC as well too. Most people will remember Sarah Alpar for being the girl that took so much damage from Jessica Rose Clark. Potentially should have gotten finished in that fight. Very, very tough fight for Sarah Alpar that time around. But for this Joselyne Edwards fight, that was a split decision win for Sarah Alpar, where she just took her grappling, like she just closed the distance time and time again, dragged this fight to the ground. But Joselyne Edwards did a really good job of getting back to her feet over and over again, landing good shots. Even the guys that were scoring at cage side, I believe it's Pat Miletich, he gave the first 2 rounds to Joselyne Edwards, and she probably should have won that fight. She is the one dishing out the damage, whereas Sarah Alpar was the one kind of just controlling the fight with her clinch and pushing her up against the cage. But damage should score more in fights, and that's actually in the criteria: damage, then cage control. So Joselyne Edwards absolutely has an argument that she should have won that fight, and she should be on an insane win streak at this point in time. Like the last time, the time she lost a fight before that was her second ever pro fight. And she actually came back and avenged that loss too by winning via armbar a couple fights later against the same woman. So, she's avenged her early loss. She should have won that fight against Sarah Alpar. Had a really good case as to why she should have won that fight. And then most recently, she beats a girl named Pamela Gonzalez. This was post-COVID era, so July of this past year, and she just dusts her in 26 seconds. Like the poor woman. Poor Pamela Gonzalez getting absolutely beat on up against the cage. Just did not seem like she deserved to be in there. Didn't even want to be in there. Edwards went to work and just absolutely pieced her up and did some solid work. Before the Sarah Alpar fight, actually, Joselyne Edwards fought the wife of Tim Means, Barbara Gonzalez Means, and she ended up beating her via armbar in the second round. But she showed a lot of good things in that fight, Joselyne, that is. Great striking, did a really good job in terms of maintaining her distance, landing good kicks, landing good punches, landing good teeps down the middle as well too. I like what we see from her. I like her ability to maintain and manage the distance the way that she did. I'm not expecting to see a grapple-heavy game plan from Wu Yanan here, kind of similar to Sarah Alpar. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is mainly going to be a striking battle, and I think we're going to see Wu kind of throwing out wind a little bit more than we're going to see Joselyne actually landing. I think we'll definitely see Joselyne get the better strikes off, probably more combinations too. She has solid jiu-jitsu as well too. I think Wu is still progressing in that aspect, even though she has a victory over Lauren Mueller via submission. I still think that Joselyne might be a little bit ahead of her, just due to how aggressive and offensive she seems off of her back too. Like the armbar that she pulled off against Brenda Gonzalez was like, as soon as she fell to her back or got taken down, she was very offensive right away. She had a high guard right off the bat, really getting her legs up there and just looking for that opportunity to kind of swing her hips around and get that armbar going, and she did exactly that. So solid work there. Very impressed with what we're seeing from Joselyne. I think she could absolutely be an issue here, and at plus 145, I think that's a solid spot for her too. The thing that kind of worries me though is if this fight does stay mainly on the feet, the possible volume advantage that Wu might have could sway the judges a little bit. I still believe that Edwards will be a little bit more effective on the feet, landing the better shots, landing the better kicks, but just continuously seeing Wu go out there and putting combinations together, even if they miss, we already know that the judges sometimes kind of just score that even if it doesn't end up being that effective. So that's where my issue is with actually betting this fight. I do think that Edwards gets the better of it. I've been stung in the past a lot with betting on newcomers, so that might be keeping me away from actually betting on Edwards here. But at plus 145, it's a very, very sexy proposition in terms of what we have with the variables here with Wu and with Joselyne Jones or Joselyne Edwards. I always want to say Joselyne Jones because there used to be a fighter in the UFC named Joselyne Jones Lieberger, so it just rolls off the tongue a little bit easier just saying Joselyne Jones. So literally the only person I know named Joselyne was Joselyne Jones. Now we got Joselyne Edwards as well too, but I like Edwards to win this fight. I think she wins via decision. Goes out there, shows off a great striking game plan. Uses her elbows, uses her kicks, uses her punches, uses that distance as well too. That's where I think it's going to be very, very important for her to manage that distance and get the better shots off. And I think she'll be able to do that. So once again, I'll go with Joselyne Edwards to win this fight via decision. And I think she could be a very, very solid prospect in this weight class. And I'm glad that she's made it to the UFC, even though she lost to Sarah Alpar 2 fights ago. Again, that was a little bit of a red flag for me because I don't really think that highly of Sarah Alpar. But once you actually watch the fight and see how it went down, you could absolutely make a case for Joselyne Edwards to have won that fight. One judge actually did give it to her. Pat Miletich actually gave it to her as well too. However, 2 other judges scored the cage control and the wrestling of Alpar more than they did the striking and the damage of Edwards. So I will go with Edwards. I think she wins this fight. I'll take her to win this fight via decision. Nassourdine Imavov versus Phil Hawes. We got minus 160 on Phil Hawes and plus 140 on Imavov. Let's start off with the Imavov side of things. He's coming off a victory over Jordan Williams last time around, where he came in as a minus 140 underdog. And that's a fight that I remember distinctly due to the fact that I don't remember much about Imavov, or at least I wasn't able to actually gather enough information regarding Imavov due to the lack of footage that was available of him before this Jordan Williams fight. Luckily, we were able to go out there and get 15 hard minutes of Imavov tape against Jordan Williams, and still feel like there's a little bit more that we need to find out about this guy to see how good he actually is. He's 9-2, same record as Phil Hawes. He's 24 years old, so he still has some time to grow. And he has a solid frame at 6'3" with a 75.5-inch reach. I think he could be a very interesting prospect in this division if he can truly round out his tools. Now he's training over there at the MMA factory in France. I believe his coach's name is something Ferdinand. I can't remember his first name, or that actually might be his first name. But he is famous for training most of those French fighters. Taylor Lapilus, Czech Congo. I think he started with Francis Ngannou before Ngannou decided to come over to the States. And then I also believe he's trained with Cyril Gane as well, too. But Imavov is a completely different guy compared to those last couple names that I've thrown out there. His nickname is a Russian sniper, which is weird, given that this guy comes from a French background. Regardless, you kind of see it in his fights because he stands kind of tall, uses his range very well, and his jab right down the middle is a very, very sharp strike of his. He does have good chokes as well, too. He showcased a couple of them against Jordan Williams, but wasn't really able to get the finish there. However, it could definitely come into play in this fight against Phil Hawes, who has shown to slow down later in fights. Now, we haven't really seen Phil Hawes push later in fights as of late, with him having finished a couple of his last opponents. Obviously the Bestayev fight and the Jacob Malkoum fight, both fights. The Bestayev fight, obviously in the Contender Series, and the Malkoum fight back at UFC 254, I believe it was. We saw him go out there and get the job done pretty quickly. Against Bestayev, it was 1 minute and 10 seconds. Against Malkoum, it was 30 seconds. And then the only footage, so there wasn't footage available for the Fraga fight or the Schober fight, but the Michael Wilcox fight, that's a fight where you saw go the full 5 minutes, and it looked like a headbutt that actually opened up that cut of Wilcox. However, they ruled it a legal strike. It was a right hand that came over the top as well right before that inverted headbutt. But regardless, Phil Hawes comes out with the victory. He's only been to the second round. Let's see. He's been to the second round 4 times in 11 fights. He won his first 2, which were his first 2 fights of his career, of his professional career. And then the next 2 fights, which were his 5th and 6th fights, 5th and 6th pro fights, both of them went into the second round and he got finished in both of them. Now, I feel like this guy is a one-and-done guy in terms of, having enough gas tank in that first round to go out there and land big shots, possibly get a takedown and do some good ground and pound. However, that second round is where the drop-off starts to begin. The power doesn't come as heavy as it does. The speed isn't there as much as it is in that first round, and that's where the concerns are. Now, we haven't seen him in that second round since 2017, so it's been a while, and he's jumped around camps as well too. His last loss was against Julian Marquez on the Contender Series, and at that time he was the best kept secret per se of Jackson Wink. Worked a lot with John Jones. That was one of the main things, especially like when they tried getting him into the Ultimate Fighter. I believe he lost to Andrew Sanchez. I could be off on that, but he didn't even make it into the house. Then he goes on to the Contender Series for the first time, gets knocked out in the second round by Julian Marquez, and then the next time he comes around finally and gets that victory over Bestayev, not before putting together 3 straight victories after losing to Julian Marquez, then comes into the Contender Series, gets that knockout, gets to take it to the UFC, and gets a quick 30-second knockout. But there's not so much that you can take from these types of fighters. Like Punahele Soriano, outside of that one decision victory that he had against Jamie Pickett, there wasn't much to really go off of. Like, the guys going out there and just starching these guys. And that's not really what you want to be betting on, because you're just always betting on these guys to go out there and get the finish. The perfect example that I'd like to bring up, at least most recently that's come up, is the Louis Kosi fight, where he's not able to get that first round finish, and then Sasha Palatnikov goes out there and finishes him in the third round. I don't know if Phil Hawes has truly made those improvements in the cardio realm. Like, we just haven't seen it. So you can't say, yes, he's going to have better cardio. I mean, we need to see him go out there and do that. I like the approach that he took in the Bestayev fight with implementing that lead leg kick, that calf kick specifically, to really get Bestayev thinking about that, and then kind of flinching on that, and then coming over with the big overhand, which was eventually the downfall of Bestayev in that fight. Another thing about Phil Hawes is he seems to have changed gyms quite often. So like I said, he started off or at least he's known for being the best kept secret at Jackson Wink. Then after his Julian Marquez fight, he went over to Bellator, and you saw Tiger Schulman in his corner. So he moved over there to, I believe it's the New York and New Jersey region that the Schulman brothers are at, and he had a couple fights with them, I believe. I wasn't able to track down the tape on his Brave CF fights or his Brave CF fights, so I wasn't able to see who's in the corner there. But then you see him go against Bestayev in the Contender Series. This was just in September of this year, and he has Sanford MMA guys in his corner. Now you're seeing, on his Instagram as well, he's mainly training over there at Sanford MMA. But roughly about 3 weeks ago, he actually went over to I believe, Switzerland to train with Volkan Oezdemir with his gym over there. So I think he just wanted to get on to that side of the world, get on kind of a similar time zone and clock by being over there in Europe, closer to Abu Dhabi rather than being down in Florida. And he still has some of his guys over there that he mainly trains with at Sanford, mainly Volkan Oezdemir being one of the guys that I was able to spot. I'm certain, obviously, his Sanford MMA coaches are going to be coming over closer to the time of the fight. But he's been spending, like I said, the last 3 weeks. Right now it's January 3rd, so we're talking about about 2 weeks before the fight's actually supposed to happen. So all in all, he's going to have been over there for a solid 5 weeks, which I think is very beneficial for him to not have to deal with the jet lag and crossing the pond during a weight cut and all the nerves that he has to deal with going into the fight week and all that type of stuff. So I think he's stacking the chips in his favor, and this is a great way to do it. Now, I've always talked about Phil Hawes being a fadeable fighter because I think he truly is a round one or bust kind of guy, and I kind of overextended myself by taking the heavy underdog odds on Jacob Malkuna last time, and I paid for it almost immediately. That the guy got put out within 30 seconds. I don't know if Imavov is that guy. I wanted to find a reason to bet Imavov here, especially as a dog, a plus 140 dog. But I feel like I need higher or better odds to actually stretch out and actually make that bet. Phil Hawes, on the other end, I still don't feel comfortable enough betting him at that minus 160 range. The spot that you do want to hit if you are liking Phil Hawes is him to win inside the distance at plus 105, or even him to win by KO, which I believe is around that plus 125, plus 130 range. I think that's the spot that you want to hit. I just don't see him winning a decision. Again, the cardio issues are too much of a flaw for me to overlook, and that's not the type of guy that I want to have my money on, especially if I'm not that confident in him being able to fight in the 6th to 15th minute mark if it ends up going there. So I do like Hawes here. I couldn't side with Imavov after running the tape. He is hittable. I think that lead calf kick that we saw Phil Hawes implement in his Bestayev fight, that could come in handy here against Imavov, as I believe that Imavov will have a 3-inch height advantage. However, Phil Hawes does have the reach advantage here. However, you can still see guys taking advantage of the height discrepancy and using that as a defensive mechanism in terms of kind of leaning back and getting out of the way of shots. That's why I think Phil Hawes has kind of chosen the route of just chewing up that lead leg, letting his opponent kind of just focus on that first, and then bring the fight back up to the head and really start landing the damage there and hopefully getting these guys out in that first round. So I'll go with Phil Hawes to win this fight via first round KO. Not the most confident in it, as I believe if this does see the second round, it could get iffy. So maybe a good live betting opportunity as well, because Phil Hawes will more than likely win that first round. Another angle that I just want to quickly throw out there is with Imavov, that choke that I was talking about. If Phil Hawes starts sucking wind in that sixth or that second round and that third round, and Imavov tries to pull off that type of choke like he tried against Jordan Williams, and as he's been successful with in his past fights, I think it could get very hairy for Phil Hawes, as I don't think he'll have as much explosion and ability to get out of those bad positions that Jordan Williams was in. And Jordan Williams was sucking wind himself too, and I feel like Phil Hawes might have a worse gas tank than that. Again, if he hasn't improved it, and I'm just basing it off of what I've seen up until this point, and that's all we have to work with. So, but I still think that we won't end up seeing that second round. I think Phil Hawes is the right side here in terms of him getting that first round KO, and that's the side that I'm going to be going with. Again, not sure if I'll actually make an official bet on it, but in terms of a prediction, I'll go with Phil Hawes to win this fight via first round KO. Punahele Soriano versus Dusko Todorovic. We got minus 160 on Dusko and plus 140 on Punahele. And let's start off with Punahele, who a lot of people seem to not like as much anymore for some reason. Both fighters are undefeated. Punahele is obviously coming off a victory over Oscar Piechota back at UFC 245. So it's been over a year since we've seen Punahele in the cage. And going into taping this fight, I thought that this was a prime spot to go out there and fade Dusko, to go out there and fade Punahele. Just kind of scrolling through Twitter and seeing most people's opinions on it, I was kind of like, okay, everybody seems to be pretty one-sided on Dusko here. And we've slowly started to see the money start to come back on Punahele. It did open up, I believe, near a pick'em, and we've seen a lot of money coming in on Dusko, but the money started to come back on Soriano at this point in time. And after running the tape, I kind of understand why. So like I said, let's start off with Punahele. A Contender Series vet. That was the first fight where he was actually extended past the first round. The first time in his career, he was actually extended past the first round, and he showed decent composure. It didn't seem like he was really panicking out there. Was able to secure takedowns against Jamie Pickett and really ride out that top position, land some good shots from on top. But it really showed the evolution of his game. Even in this fight against Oscar Piechota, we didn't really see a crazy pace from him right off the bat. I think Oscar Piechota's kind of style really brings that out of guys, but I thought we saw a little bit more of a patient Punahele, even though that fight still ended in that first round. We didn't really see him bum rushing, desperately forward, trying to find the chin of Oscar, but eventually he was able to find it and put him out about 3 minutes into that first round. But the kid is a thick dude. He's a big dude. And I feel like his strength is definitely going to play a factor in most of his victories in his fights. And I think it's going to be a big part of this fight against Dusko as well, too. He still has a little bit of work to do when it comes to sharpening up his game with more combinations rather than just blitzing forward with big hooks and strikes. But it's worked out for him up until this point. Obviously, he wasn't able to put out Pickett, but we saw that he was able to adjust on the fly, get the fight to the ground, and get it to a pace where it allows him to not really gas out, but also give him an opportunity to kind of catch his breath while still controlling the fight and scoring on the judges' scorecards, which eventually that fight did end up going to, and he did win a decision in that fight. I truly thought that he was a first round robust fighter, and we can't really 100% say that that's the type of the fighter that he is, because the only time we've seen him outside of the first round, he did go out there and win a decision, and he went about it in a very intelligent manner, in my opinion, which is going after the takedown, getting the fight to the ground, and kind of just riding out that top position. He seems like a very strong opponent. He seems like his explosion is very good too, in terms of being able to get to that point where he explodes forward with a bunch of punches, initiates the clinch and then goes straight for that double leg, and more often than not is able to secure it. Dusko, on the other hand, a little bit more lighter on his feet, uses his kicks very well too, almost has a karate type of stance, but we saw a little bit more of a patient approach from him against against Daquan Townsend, which was his last fight. That was a fight where I thought, Townsend would have a little bit more success being a big dude and having a ton of experience, but Dusko actually kind of just squashed that. He did a good job of kind of, corralling Townsend up against the cage, doing some good work in the clinch, and then eventually getting the fight to the ground and getting that finish in the second round. However, I do feel like there are still question marks regarding Dusko's cardio itself. He did win that fight against Teddy Ash on the Contender Series, but to me, even though he won that third round, it did seem like there were opportunities for opponents to take advantage of him and the state that he was in that third round. Now, the majority of that Teddy Ash fight was spent up against a cage where he was showing off a good head position in the clinch, kind of forcing his forehead into the chin and the neck area of Teddy Ash to keep him up against the cage, and then doing magnificent work to the body with his uppercuts and the damage that he's doing with his hands. Very, very impressive for sure. I think the kid has a ton of potential as well, too. He moves better than Punahele. I think he has a higher ceiling than Punahele as well too. But at this point in time, I think Soriano could absolutely pull off the upset victory here as the underdog. I do think that Puna has a ton of power in his hands, and not often I'll side with guys that seem to only have that one path to victory, which is getting guys out of there early. But that's kind of what Todorovic's game was as well before coming over to the UFC. He was getting guys out of there pretty early, where we didn't really get to see much of his cardio tested later in fights. Like the Teddy Ash fight went to a decision. It's funny that both of their Contender Series fights went to a decision, and that's really the only decisions that they won in their career, or the only fights that have ever gone to decisions in their career. So I think this is a perfect time for them to really get matched up against each other to see who might have a better career in the UFC. But at this point in time, I think Punahele could land that big punch to absolutely drop and hurt Todorovic even later in fights. The one qualm that I have with Todorovic's stand-up game is he relies heavily on like his head movement to get him out of the way of these big shots and kind of just leaning backwards, not really cutting angles well when he's trying to be defensive, kind of just moving backwards and just, pulling his head back. Sure, it's worked for him up until this point, but eventually it's going to catch up to him. Just ask Anderson Silva. You know what I mean? That's how he eventually ended up losing his title and stopping that run that he had going through the middleweight division. And that's kind of what I'm seeing from Dusko here in terms of his defense. Like his hands are more often down, more often than not down, rather than actually being up and kind of protecting from any of the shots coming his way. And he leans back a lot, and he's thinking that's going to save him more often than not. I feel like Punahele could actually land in those types of situations where, he's very explosive moving forward. His winging shots cover so much range, and I think that might catch up to Dusko in this fight. But even if this fight does get extended, I kind of side with Punahele's ability to get the fight to the ground, and we have a small sample size of that, so it's hard to say how efficient he will actually be in those certain situations. But I feel like Puna definitely has more power than Todorovic. He seems like the stronger dude. He should be able to bull rush his way into those clinch positions and possibly get those takedowns as well too. Todorovic, we did see some good top position from him against Townsend, especially dealing with Townsend, who was squirming a lot and trying to buck his opponent off of him. But Todorovic did a really good job of kind of just flowing with the movements and eventually getting that TKO finish. But I think Puna is going to be a different animal here. So I like Puna. I'm not sure enough to the point of actually betting him. Plus 140 is not a bad line, especially in a fight where I think it's a little bit more 50-50. So if people do feel that way, there is a bit of an edge and value on Puna in that line. And that's where I'm kind of leaning. Again, I'm not sure if I'll bet it, but I think he has a very solid shot of going out there and beating Todorovic and springing this upset. So I do like Puna to win this fight. I think he gets it done inside the distance as well too. I think he has a ton of power in his hands. His durability is off the charts too. I'm not sure why people are riding home about Todorovic. If you get it at a pick'em line, I understand at that point, but at that minus 150, minus 160 range, I do favor Punahele too. So I'm going to go with Puna to win this fight via KO, probably first or second round. I think he lands that bomb, but I also think that he overpowers Todorovic as well. So if this fight does get into deeper waters, I could absolutely see him being successful with his strength, getting Todorovic down. And I don't think that Todorovic will get away with his clinch work that he's been able to be successful with his past opponents. I don't think he'll be able to do that to Puna, at least not enough to, score rounds or anything like that. I think we'll see a little bit more from Puna here. So I'm going with Puna. I think he definitely live to win this fight as an underdog. He is a live underdog, like I'll say. But yeah, I'll go with Puna to win this fight, first or second round KO. Joaquin Buckley versus Alessio Di Chirico. We got minus 270 on Joaquin Buckley and plus 230 on Alessio Di Chirico. Let's start off with the sensation, Mr. Joaquin Buckley, who's coming off a victory over Jordan Wright, but that was right after he pretty much just blew up on the map after that crazy KO that he had over Impa Kasanganay, where he just landed a beautiful spinning back kick after Kasanganay caught his foot, and it blew the whole world on fire. Like, even when you're getting guys like Kanye West tweeting out or Instagramming out videos of your knockout, you've absolutely made it. And I'm sure his social media accounts have definitely seen it, and even the way that the UFC is pushing him, they've definitely seen it. Like, just for example, right before the Jordan Wright fight is about to start, like, I'm talking about after the fighter introductions, like after Bruce Buffer calls both of them out, they quickly show a replay of his knockout of Impa Kasanganay, and then it fades out into them starting the fight, which is absolutely crazy. Like, if I'm Jordan Wright and I'm standing there staring across from freaking Joaquin Buckley, and I see on the screens that they're playing the replay of that knockout that he had in his last fight, I'm like, what the fuck, guys? I'm about to go fight this guy, and you want to show me that? Maybe if you're a positive or a glass half full type of athlete and you're the one in the cage there with Buckley, you're just like, you know what, I'm going to use that as motivation. I want to go and take this guy's shine. And unfortunately for Jordan Wright, he was not able to do so that night. And I was one of the suckers that did take Jordan Wright around that plus 200 range, as I felt like the hype job of Joaquin Buckley is in. I still believe the hype job is there, hence why they're feeding him a guy that's 0-3 in his last 3 fights. More often than not, UFC goes out there and cuts guys like these. However, they see an opportunity where they can continue to cash in on this Joaquin Buckley thing. However, I don't think it's going to cash in for them in the manner that they're expecting, which is a highlight reel knockout. We're talking about Alessio Di Chirico, who hasn't been knocked out to this point in his, 17 MMA fights that he's had, never been knocked out in his career. Now, he did get dropped in his last fight against Zach Cummings in the last second of the fight, which possibly could have led to his first ever knockout loss if that fight maybe went 5 or 10 seconds more, maybe even 5 seconds. If he gave that 5 more seconds, Zach Cummings would have rushed him, and the referee definitely would have stopped that. That was a buzzer beater of a knockout. But even then, he wasn't like completely out. Like, he got hurt, but he was pretty much right back to his feet, and obviously he was stumbling all over the place, but he's never really been put cold out. However, the one thing I don't really like about Di Chirico's game is his ability to continuously march or give up his back foot. Like, he's always the one on his back foot more often than not. In the Mahmoud Muradov fight, there were a couple times where he was the one moving forward, but that was more so Muradov just kind of playing into that counter-striking game. Now, Di Chirico, on the other hand, he doesn't do as well in that. Like, he has a nasty body kick from his southpaw position whenever he's in that position or in that stance. But outside of that, like, it has a couple combinations here and there, kind of low output. Like, if you're losing a striking battle to Zach Cummings, it's probably not the best way to go. Like, Zach Cummings, most of his victories have come via submission, and not often does he go, well, he does have a couple knockouts on his record as well, but in terms of like going out there and having a stand-up fight for 15 minutes, that should have been Di Chirico's fight. Unfortunately for him, he comes out on the losing end there, and that was his third straight loss in a row. Now, they do share a similar loss to Kevin Holland. Obviously, Joaquin Buckley got knocked out by him. Kevin Holland went to a decision with Di Chirico. So I think I think how this fight will probably play out is Joaquin Buckley pretty much just setting the pace of this fight, moving forward the entire time, throwing his bombs, kind of like the Kevin Holland fight. However, I expect him to hit more, be more successful with the shots, and not have as much success on the back foot like Kevin Holland did as Di Chirico is going to have in this fight. So I do like Joaquin Buckley to win this fight. I do think that he gets it done. I think he wins a decision, which is why I think the last time I looked at it was plus 250 or plus 275 for Joaquin Buckley to win this fight via decision. And I kind of think that's the way that I'm going to be going here. I'm not 100% sure if I'll make it an official bet or anything like that, but I do think it's a solid parlay piece. If you guys are looking to put in Buckley into parlays, I don't mind that at this point in time. I'm still calling his bluff in terms of thinking that he is a bit of a height job, but you can't discredit some of the victories that he's had recently. So I will give him some credit. I do think he's a talented guy. He's 26 years old, so he's definitely growing. He could be adding more things to his arsenal, but I think this is a perfectly made fight for him to go out there and possibly get a knockout. I don't see it happen. Historically, we just haven't seen Di Chirico get knocked out. We've seen him go out there and fight big punchers like a Oluwale Bamboche, a Julian Marquez. Even Joaquin Buckley is definitely up there too. But we'll see if Buckley's able to find that chin and get him out of there. The one thing that does concern me about Di Chirico, though, however, is if he decides to change it up. Like, if he goes for a takedown, I feel like he could be successful with a takedown. However, in fights that he has gone for takedowns, he hasn't really been most successful in keeping these guys down. And that's where I think the issue is. I think Buckley's quite good at getting back to his feet and then re-establishing his game, which is moving forward the entire time, throwing big, heavy shots, and keeping Di Chirico on the back foot. So that's where I think that Buckley wins this fight. Minus 270. A little bit chalky, I completely understand that, but I think the angle here could potentially be Joaquin Buckley to win this fight via decision, and that's probably the way that I'm going to be going. So I'll go Joaquin Buckley to win this fight via decision and continue this 3-fight winning streak that he's on. Unfortunately for the UFC and the hype machine that they're trying to build around this guy, I don't think that they're going to get that highlight reel knockout that they're looking for to continuously build and bring this guy up the ranks and try to get the popularity behind him a little bit more. But yeah, I will be going with Joaquin Buckley to win this fight via decision. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Li Jingliang. We got minus 280 on the returning Santiago Ponzinibbio and plus 240 on the Leech Li Jingliang. So let's start off with the Li side, who's coming off with loss to Neil Magny last time around as a minus 175 favorite. A lot of people were writing off the underdog and the veteran in Neil Magny, thinking that this was the time for Li Jingliang to really, pan out and become that or fulfill the potential that we saw from him several years ago when he first made his debut in the UFC. A lot of people are high on Li. He did take a couple of losses early in his UFC career. However, he managed to string together three straight victories, two of them over David Zawada and Alessio Zaleski dos Santos, who Dos Santos was on a bit of a tear himself too before running into the Leech. Zaleski was actually a minus 255 favorite going into that, and the Leech did end up springing the upset there, but unfortunately wasn't able to get the job done against the veteran Neil Magny. Neil Magny went out there and absolutely big brothered Li Jingliang and actually showcased, cardio and the grappling skills that Neil Magny actually has that a lot of people were overlooking in this matchup. Now, Li, he seems to be that guy that really likes to get things done with his hands, not to mention that sidekick that he landed perfectly on David Zawada to actually drop him and get that finish near the end of that fight. And even in the Alessio Zaleski dos Santos fight, showed great power in his hands, eventually putting away Zaleski, I believe, with roughly 9 seconds left in the fight. So he shows that he has power in his hands for sure. However, more often than not, we don't really see as many finishes on his side, at least in terms of hitting that over 1.5, which is a spot that I'm most confident in this fight. Kind of surprised that the odds makers actually went with the 1.5 rather than the 2.5. I'd be a little bit more skeptical if we had to go those extra 5 minutes. However, 7.5 minutes I think is a great amount of time for this type of fight. So the Leech, we know he likes to rely on his striking and his hands, but he isn't really super high output, but also really looks to be a little bit more patient with his approach. And when he does throw with a lot of bad intentions. Most of his striking does come from his hands, which is his primary approach, but he really just tries to feint and looks for openings on his opponents. He rolls very well with shots as well too, which is why he's only been finished once in the UFC, which was over 5 years ago, and that was only by a rear naked choke by Keita Nakamura. On the flip side, we got Santiago Ponzinibbio, who hasn't fought since he beat Neil Magny. I believe that was a headlining fight he had against him, Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he headlined the fight night there against Neil Magny in front of his hometown, in front of his home crowd, and was able to put together a masterful performance, eventually putting away Neil Magny in that 4th round. What was his approach pretty much in that fight was the leg kicks, and we've seen that in his past fights as well too, where he beats up the lead leg of his opponents and then lets his hands go behind that. He did it against Nassourdine Taleb, did it against Mike Perry, and absolutely did it to perfection against Neil Magny as well too. He's a very educated striker, has a great 1-2 down the middle, uses his jab very well too, but primarily it seems like his kick game is what leads him to his victories more often than not. He's with a great training camp down there in American Top Team, been getting in some good work there with high-level coaches, high-level training partners, and I feel like they'll have him prepared well enough to go up against Li Jingliang, especially after being off as long as he has. I believe the last time he fought was in the ending of 2018, so we're talking about just over 2 years and roughly 3 months of a layoff for Santiago. What kept him out of those fights or kept him out for that long was an infection in his knee of some sort. Luckily for him, he managed to battle back from that and is now ready to resume his MMA career, especially when it's kind of at his pinnacle as well too. Like coming off a big win over Neil Magny, especially as a headliner, definitely puts you up there as one of the top prospects in that division. Not even just prospects, he's fully panned out into that potential that we had from. Heck, he was even supposed to fight Robbie Lawler at UFC 254 at the end of 2019. However, he gets pulled from that due to the infection, and now he's kind of just dipping his toes back in the water in terms of getting back into the UFC. I think this is a great matchup for him. However, I'm just not so sold on him at that minus 280 line, especially coming after such a long layoff. Now, I'm not entirely sure how bad the infection was or how much of a detriment it's been to him, but the fact that he's actually coming back and has taken off the necessary amount of time, I think this is a perfect time to for him to come back. However, I'm just not the most certain on actually wagering money on him or even putting him in a parlay, which is why, like I said near the beginning of this breakdown, which is why I like the over 1.5. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit more of an cautious approach from Santiago to kind of get his feet wet, get that ring rust off, and hopefully in that amount of time he doesn't get knocked out by Lee or anything like that. But again, the last time he got finished was by Lorenz Larkin back in 2015. So we're talking about over 5 years for both of these guys since they last got finished. In terms of how often they're over 1.5 hit in the UFC, we're talking about 15 out of 22 times, or it's 17 out of 22 times that these guys actually hit the over 1.5, which again, surprised why the odds makers didn't set it at 2.5 compared to the 1.5. But at that minus 165, minus 170-ish range for that over 1.5, that's a spot that I really like. I can see them kind of feeling each other out, not really overcommitting on anything too much. And again, they roll very well with their shots too. Ponzinibbio has been dropped, I believe, over 5 times in his UFC career, whereas Li Jingliang hasn't been dropped that often. I think it's been 1 or 2 times up until this point. So very hard guys to put away, but good at putting guys away too. And that more often than not, when guys are good at putting opponents away, but are harder to put away themselves, more often than not we see these guys go a little bit longer into their fights, especially being a little bit more cautious as well too. So I think both guys are quite durable. The slight little bit of reservations and concern I have is the layoff for Santiago. I'm hoping it didn't have too much of an impact on his durability. I'm hoping it doesn't start too slow where he just tries to get comfortable once again and then gets caught by something from Lee. But I just don't see that happening. I truly think that the over is the spot here. The juice on Santiago is a little bit too high, and I think the skill discrepancy when it comes to the striking game is a little bit too wide between Lee and Santiago to truly go out there and place a bet on Li Jingliang. I'm not going to hate on anybody or talk down on anybody that's taking Lee here, as I do think that this could be a prime spot to take advantage of of a plus 240 favorite or plus 240 underdog in Lee. However, I just think that if Santiago shows up with not missing a step or anything like that, or even like 50% of what we've seen before, he could absolutely go out there and win a decision here against the Leech. So I'll go with Santiago Ponzinibbio to win this fight via decision, but the spot that I like most in this fight is the over 1.5. Carlos Condit versus Matt Brown. We got minus 160 on the Natural Born Killer and plus 140 on Matt the Immortal Brown. Let's start off with Carlos Condit, who's coming off a victory over Court McGee. It was his first victory since he defeated Thiago Alves way back in May of 2015, where he finished him with a beautiful elbow that actually broke the nose of Thiago Alves, which they were forced to stop the fight in between rounds there. But he's been on a very tumultuous run, giving up fights to Damian Maia, Neil Magny, Cowboy Oliveira, and Michael Chiesa, then finally getting back on the winning track against Court McGee. But in the fight with McGee, it was more so McGee fighting the type of fight that Condit needed to win that fight, and not really implementing the style that we've known and loved from Court McGee, which is that grinding style of just pushing guys up against the cage, getting takedowns, and just having an overall MMA game. For some reason, he just went out there and just went strike for strike with Carlos Condit, and that's not how you want to go about it, especially when Condit's able to get out of the way of the big shots that are coming his way from Court McGee and kind of just get his game going with kicks and body punches and just the style that Carlos Condit brings to the table. Changes stances very fluidly, throws kicks and punches in combinations as well too, which very much helps in terms of volume and scoring on the judge's eyes. And yeah, that was just a very unfortunate performance from Court McGee, and I'd be very, very upset if I was one of those people that took that minus 130, minus 140 on Court McGee in that fight, hoping that he'd try to drag this fight to the ground, because one thing that we've come to know about Carlos Condit is that he's just never going to work on his takedown defense. Let me backtrack a little bit. He might work on the takedown defense, but it just never shows in the cage. Like, it's pretty easy to take him down. And more often than not, his opponents have found that method of victory where they just continuously take him down and, play in his guard and keep top control, land some good ground and pound, and just score in that way, whether they're able to get a submission eventually or get the finish themselves or just go on to a decision victory itself. The one issue there, I think it is because Carlos Condit is so comfortable off of his back, and he thinks he's going to be able to catch somebody off of his back with his jiu-jitsu, because he has had near opportunities against opponents, most notably and most recently against Michael Chiesa, where he was able to throw up a triangle against Chiesa, and it was pretty tight. Unfortunately, Michael Chiesa was able to explode out of that position and not get not tap to that armbar. So the last time Carlos Condit actually did submit somebody was over 13 years ago against Carlo Prater in the WEC. So he's never even gotten a submission victory in the UFC. So not sure why he continues to play that game and think that he's going to be able to pull something off or pull off a reversal or whatever it is. He does his best work on his feet, but unfortunately, he just never shows the urgency of getting back to his feet. So that's where I think the issue comes with Carlos Condit. He looks great on the feet when people are allowing him to play his game. Unfortunately for him, I don't think Matt Brown's going to allow him to play that game. Now let's go over to the Matt Brown side of things, who's coming off a loss to Miguel Baeza, who's a bright up-and-coming star. I think Baeza has top 5 to top 10 potential. So to lose to a kid like that, especially, closing in on 40 years old, not to mention today is Matt Brown's 40th birthday. I'm recording this on January 10th, which is the Sunday before fight week. And it's tough for him to go out there and try to beat a young up-and-comer. Luckily for him, though, he's fighting Carlos Condit, who himself has had a ton of miles on his record. He's coming into his 45th fight, so it's not a young, spry little kid that Matt Brown needs to worry about across from him. It's been the complete opposite, that Matt Brown has been able to go on a 2-fight winning streak before the Baeza fight, where he put out Diego Sanchez and he put out Ben Saunders as well too. And then before that, lost to Donald Cerrone and Jake Ellenberger. Especially that Ellenberger loss, he lost as a heavy favorite. I'm sure a lot of people got their parlays busted that night as well too. But yeah, I think Matt Brown brings that style that is very effective against a guy like Carlos Condit, which is stay in his face, don't give him that space that he needs to get his striking off, and just drown him. You know what I mean? Just push him up against the cage, use some dirty boxing. But even if it's not the clinch or the dirty boxing, just continuously press forward and land shots. Don't discriminate to the face or to the body or even to the legs. And we've seen that Matt Brown still has a little bit of power in his hands that he could potentially hurt Carlos Condit with and drop as well too. Matt Brown obviously has been susceptible to body punches and kicks in the past too, so that's something that we're always going to have to keep our eye on. And Carlos Condit does have a good kicking game, so that's something that we should definitely make a note of when going into this fight. However, I think that Matt Brown, given his style and what we've seen from him as of late, and even though he got knocked out in his last fight, I think that's kind of baked into this line. Personally, I would line it a little bit closer to an even type of fight. I'm not sure where people think Carlos Condit is just because he got a victory over Court McGee last time around. But again, that was due to Court McGee playing the game that Carlos Condit needed to get his hand raised in that fight. I don't think Matt Brown's going to allow him to do that. I'd be surprised if we see Matt Brown just chilling on the outside within kicking range, within Carlos Condit range, if that's what you want to call it. But I think that we're going to see Brown pushing forward pretty much the entire fight and really taking it to Carlos Condit, which should allow Matt Brown to get his hand raised. I will give Carlos Condit some daps in terms of his durability. Like it's been a long time since we've seen him actually knocked out. Most of his losses have come via submission as of late, and I don't think that Matt Brown is going to go out there and submit him either. So it's either Matt Brown via TKO, which I still am a little bit hesitant about, but I do like the decision for Matt Brown a little bit more than that. So the side that I'm going to be going with is Matt Brown, taking it to Carlos Condit, staying in his face, not letting him breathe, not letting him get comfortable, and I think he ends up getting a decision victory. I think that once people start seeing this fight play out, they're going to be like, fuck, of course, this is the way the fight's going to go. Just as Carlos Condit's fight against Court McGee went. Like, within that first minute, you're just like, damn, of course this is the way the fight's going to go. And I think with this Matt Brown thing, it's going to be the same way. I think a lot of people are expecting Matt Brown to go out there and get knocked out. However, Carlos Condit, not really like a one-punch knockout type of kind of guy. Again, he finished Thiago Alves. Before that, he finished Martin Kampmann way back in 2013. But since then, just never really had success in terms of rocking, dropping, and finishing anybody. And even the Thiago Alves finish, that was like a beautifully placed elbow that cracked the nose of Thiago Alves, and eventually it was kind of like an injury TKO, if anything. And then the Martin Kampmann one, that was like a Max Holloway type of finish where it's just an accumulation of strikes, and then once that fourth round hit, he was able to kind of overwhelm Martin Kampmann and get the victory that way as well too. So I do like Matt Brown to win this fight. I do like him as an underdog at plus 140. The only flaw I see on his side is the fact that he's 40 years old. But given the fact that he's only fighting Carlos Condit in this point in time, I don't think it's too much to really harp on. So I like Matt Brown. I think he wins this fight via decision, and I think he's a solid underdog play as well. Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. We got minus 160 currently on Max Holloway and plus 140 on Calvin Kattar. And we've seen this line actually come down a little bit more towards the Calvin Kattar side as this actually the new year hasn't even begun. I'm actually recording this on December 30th. A good amount of time before this fight is actually supposed to go down. So hopefully we don't actually have any pullouts or anything like that, which would affect this fight from actually happening. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot more love for Calvin Kattar now, and I'm starting to understand as to why. So when I put out my leans for my guys over on the Patreon, I had initially said that minus 200 on Max Holloway pre-tape looks like it's a very good spot where it could be, a solid spot for people to take advantage of a Max Holloway at really good odds. And then right before I got into actually doing the tape and doing the research for it, I saw him down to like minus 170, minus 165, and I'm like, okay, let me get my work in, and we can see if this is truly a spot that deserves to be, around those odds or even higher if possible. After I started getting into it, this is probably the deepest I've gone into a fight, given the fact that it's just so tough to call. But once I came out on the other side, I have a decent amount of confidence in the underdog here. So the reason I like Calvin Kattar, he's coming off a win over Dan Ige, which was his first 5-round main event fight in the UFC, but it was actually his second main event overall. His fight before that, or a couple fights before that, he actually fought Zabit Magomedsharipov. I believe it was 2 fights before that. He fought Zabit in a 3-round main event, which actually got put together pretty short notice. If most people remember, that fight night was supposed to be headlined by Alexander Volkov and Alistair Overeem. Unfortunately, Overeem pulls out. Volkov gets a short notice Greg Hardy. Obviously, Greg Hardy's not down to go 5 rounds, so they demote Volkov down to the co-main event. They push up Zabit all the way up to the main event. However, he doesn't want the 3 rounds or the 5 rounds. And obviously, Calvin Kattar and his teams wanted that 5 rounds. Unfortunately, Zabit obviously being the be-all, end-all in this situation, they didn't allow that to happen. And unfortunately for Kattar, it being a 3-round, he did have a really good 3rd round against Zabit. Unfortunately, he could not really deal with the unorthodox nature of the attack and approach from Zabit in those first 2 rounds. So he dropped that. However, he comes back, knocks out Jeremy Stephens in a brutal fashion, beautiful step and elbow to kind of, take away the power that was coming his way from a counter from Jeremy Stephens, drops and wobbles Stephens, and eventually finishes him with some beautiful ground and pound and a beautiful elbow as well to follow up on the ground to cut him up and just absolutely have him splattering blood. One of the more disgusting cuts that I've ever seen, or at least one of the more disgusting aftermaths of a cut that I've seen in terms of it just absolutely leaking out of Jeremy Stephens' forehead. And then Calvin Kattar comes back and headlines a fight night on Fight Island and goes 5 hard rounds against Dan Ige. He only really dropped that 2nd round, but the first 3, 4, and 5th rounds were very, very much in his favor. His striking looked on point. The only concerning part to me was I was hoping that he'd land a little bit more than 105 strikes. And that's where my hesitancy here comes with Calvin Kattar, because technically he's a much crisper striker than Max Holloway. And, I think that's why we're seeing the amount of love come in for Kattar, because people are really in the know regarding what Kattar's capabilities are with his hands. And even his kicks, too. His kicks aren't too bad. But the most amount of his damage does come from his hands, and they're so crisp, so sharp, and even his jab too, just a piston down the middle, really busting dudes up with that jab for sure. Now the issue with Max Holloway, who's coming off of 2 straight losses now to Alexander Volkanovski, both title fights, both 5-round fights. The second one, a little bit more in the favor of Holloway, but still the judges ended up giving it to Volkanovski. It truly comes down to that third round, even though one of the judges actually ended up giving, I believe it was round 4 or round 5 to Holloway. But in terms of like MMA decisions after like 2,100 fan scoring cards, it came down to that third round. Rounds 1 and 2, obviously Holloway. Rounds 4 and 5, Volkanovski. But that round 3 was super, super close. Like, you could even give it a 10-10, and unfortunately that fight would be a draw, and we don't like draws in this day and age. However, I truly think that fight was deserving of being a draw. Now, the fight before that, he dealt with a weird stylistic matchup against Volkanovski, where Volkanovski really, decided to beat up that lead leg of Holloway, and Holloway was forced to fight out of his secondary stance for the majority of that fight due to just the amount of damage that he took on that lead foot. And the interesting thing about Volkanovski's game plan with attacking that lead foot is he kind of was waiting for, or he's kind of using the feints of the leg kick to kind of open up his hands against Holloway, or even using his hands as a counter for Holloway whenever he came in. And he got a lot of, the better of a lot of the exchanges, hence why he ended up winning that first fight. The second fight, we saw Holloway come back and almost go for like a tit-for-tat approach with Volkanovski. Anytime Volkanovski threw a kick, Holloway followed up with one of his own. He kind of just wanted to match Volkanovski's output and then some. Unfortunately for him, he still wasn't able to get his hand raised that night. Before that, he took on Frankie Edgar, beats him in a decision. But the one kind of narrative that I found during this crazy run of Holloway, especially after winning the belt, he's fighting a lot of guys that are shorter than him. And I'm not saying that's the be-all, end-all of this fight with Kattar, who's going to be matching him in height. But the last time somebody fought Holloway, who was the same height or taller than him, was when Holloway fought Cole Miller back in 2015. So we're talking close to 6 years since he's fought somebody who's close to his size, or at least his size or taller. So I think that's going to be a kind of a detriment here for Holloway, who it seems like he kind of depends on his range a little bit to get out of the shots and slip shots of most of the guys that he's facing, because they're just slightly shorter and not able to really to match that reach or match that height of Holloway. So Holloway had a lot of success in terms of slipping a lot of the punches, or even just kind of slipping enough that he didn't take the brunt of his opponent's punches. Now, we've seen him hurt, we've seen him rocked, but we've never seen him dropped, which is crazy that we've never seen a knockdown recorded in Max Holloway's career. But Dustin Poirier hurt him a bunch of times in their fights. Jose Aldo even hurt him a couple times in the first and second round of their fights. And then we obviously saw Aldo's cardio drop off, and that's where Holloway starts to really thrive, just as he did in the Anthony Pettis fight as well too. But the Dustin Poirier fight is the fight that we really saw what happens when he goes up against a striker that is much more technical than him and can actually last a 5-round pace with him. Guys like Frankie Edgar are able to handle that pace too, but they don't have nearly as good of a striking game as a Dustin Poirier, or even in this case, a Calvin Kattar. The Jose Aldo fight did not have the cardio to hold up with the pace that Holloway pushes. Now, I think that Kattar has the ability to follow up and continue with the same pace that he has from round 1 to round 5, but the volume is kind of concerning to me. Holloway is a high volume guy. He'll throw over 100 strikes in a 5-round fight any given day. Kattar, on the other hand, he outstruck Ige by 20 strikes, 105 to 85, I believe the numbers were. But I expected him to, kind of have a little bit more output against a guy who technically is just not on his level when it comes to the striking game. Now, Holloway, technically, again, not on the level of Kattar, but again, he can get away with his pressure, his pace, and his cardio. I just don't know if that's going to be enough for him here against Kattar. He might be able to out-volume Kattar, but it's going to come down to the more damaging strikes, and I got to give that edge to Kattar here. We saw in the Dustin Poirier fight that Holloway did slightly outstrike Dustin Poirier, especially in a couple of those rounds, but those rounds we saw Dustin Poirier land some significant shots, hurt, rock, but not drop. That's the issue there. We've never seen Holloway truly drop from punches, but we've seen him rocked and stunned for sure. And that's where I think that Kattar's going to have to go to take this fight. Like if he goes out there, lands some big shots, we've seen Holloway hurt. At a certain point, that chin of his is going to break. And Kattar could absolutely be the guy to do that. So my confidence is on the Kattar side. And I feel like he's on the up and up. Holloway is still a young guy, even though he has a bunch of fight miles on him. I believe he's only 29 years old. Calvin Kattar, on the other hand, is still like trying to find his footing in the UFC. He's had setbacks to Renato Moicano, who just had a way better kicking game and absolutely chewed up the front leg of Kattar, which really took off the output, the power, and made him very hesitant. We don't see a kick-heavy game from Holloway, so I don't think we need to worry too much about that. The only reason we saw Holloway kicking as much as we did in his last fight, it was more of a response to the first fight with Volkanovski, where he wanted to match the same type of game plan and then try to put a little bit more oomph into it. Now, if we see Holloway come out there and go Jose Aldo on Kattar, I'd be a little bit concerned if I had some money on Kattar now. I just don't think that's historically what we've seen from Holloway, so it's hard to say that that's what we can expect from him here. He's mainly a hands type of guy, a couple kicks here and there, but not Renato Moicano level kicks, and that's where the issue is. So I think that Kattar being a little bit more slick on the feet, a little bit better with his punches, matching the range now, being the bigger guy in terms of reach, and it kind of being the same height as Max Holloway, I think that's going to throw Holloway off. So I like Kattar here. I wouldn't even be surprised if he gets a knockout too, because Holloway's been hurt a lot. I know he's never been put away, and a lot of people might rag on me for even saying that Kattar has the potential to finish Holloway, but he has a mean striking game. He has some good power. Holloway is very hittable. And dare I say, Holloway has a little bit of that tall man defense syndrome, where he doesn't really care too much about what's coming his way because he's so tall. More often than not, he's taller than his opponents, and he's able to get out of the way of those. That's where it gets interesting for me. So I'm still not 100% sure if I'm going to be making the bet on Kattar at plus 140 as well. It's a little bit sketchy. I'm interested to see once fight week kicks off if that Holloway love is going to come in due to his popularity, and if we see the line start to move towards Holloway again. If that's the case, I might be forced to make a play on Kattar here, but I am going to pick Kattar. I think he wins this fight. I think he has a solid opportunity to finish this fight too, but I will ultimately take him to win this fight via decision. Just slicker hands, slicker boxing, decent chin, ever improving game. That New England Cartel's crew is on a bit of a tear right now, especially with Rob Font just finishing Marlon Moraes in the first round, especially in his last in the last UFC event, the December 19th event. So they're literally going back to back on events with this New England Cartel team, and now Kattar getting this main event spot. He knows this is the spot for him to go out there and really establish himself in that top three of this division, and he's so deserving because he's a very high level talent, and I think this is the perfect fight for him to go out there and showcase that. So I'm picking Kattar. Again, wouldn't be surprised by a finish, but I will take him to win by decision just to be on the safe side. But yeah, I got Calvin Kattar to win this fight via decision. And that's a wrap on the breakdowns. I appreciate you guys checking out the episode. As always, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the like, drop a comment as well too if you guys want to chit chat a little bit more. Obviously, check out the Patreon. Link is in the description below. And yeah, that's really about it. I'll be back on Friday, dropping the next podcast on Friday for the Wednesday card, the January 20th card. That breakdown will be out in full on Friday. However, over the next couple of days, I'll be dropping them on the Patreon as well too. Breakdown by breakdown starting on Monday. I will start dropping those for the Patreon members. So if you want early access to the breakdowns, make sure you guys hit up the Patreon. And I might even have some bets for those cards as well too. So check out the Patreon for that as well. Again, everything is in the description below. Make sure you guys check that shit out. And good luck on your bets this weekend. Hope you guys enjoy the new setup. Again, still waiting for some more decorative stuff to come in. Damn it, Canada Post. But that's about it. I appreciate you guys checking out the episode, and good luck on your bets this weekend.